Welcome to the hard sell where the stick in the swill-bucket rattles back. And today we have a Happiness in Magazines episode that I can practically guarantee no one watching this will ever guess at the subject. Even this eye-searing method of presentation is both a clue and a red herring. It's a magazine that only put out one issue on a subject that was relevant for barely a year and only ever taken seriously for about 5 minutes by anyone except the man at the centre, and quickly became one of the biggest and most infamous failures, fiascos and laughingstocks in the history of its industry, or any industry. It was now 40 years ago, but is still remembered to this day. Indeed, it may never be forgotten as a cautionary tale of extraordinary magnitude, centering around one of the stupidest ideas anyone has ever had. And it all but destroyed the reputation and career of one of Britain's smartest innovators and inventors, at least for the rest of his life. Today's hard sell is about the one and only edition of C5 Driver magazine. This is going to take some backstory. I just said this was infamous, and it is, but it was also 40 years ago. Infamous doesn't mean that the Zoomers and the Alphas, or even the younger millennials, have necessarily heard of it. First of all, yes, that thing on the cover is a real vehicle that was on the market in 1985. No, it's not a mobility scooter. It's an actual on-road conveyance intended for driving down the street alongside proper cars. 100% street legal, somehow. To be driven by anyone over the age of 14 without tax, license or insurance. And that might actually be the maddest part of the whole debacle, although it's really hard to pick just one. Back up. Sir Clive Sinclair was one of the smartest men in Britain, one of the pioneers of consumer electronics and home computing. He invented the first slimline pocket calculator. He invented the robot hamster. Most famously, he created the ZX81 and the ZX Spectrum, the legendary consoles that essentially ensured that there is a corner of video gaming that is forever Britain. Having done that, he decided to move on to another passion of his, electric transport, and in so doing, created his own doom. Sinclair first revealed he was going into the vehicle business in mid-1983. The world reacted with surprise, confusion, and scepticism. The Economist flat out asked if he was crazy, and warned he may have been, indeed probably was, making a ghastly mistake. After 18 months of speculation, the C5, the first 4 having been prototypes and therefore presumably even worse, was unveiled at a glitzy launch event at Alexandra Palace. Sinclair always was something of a showman. There were glamour stooges handing out press packs, there were t-shirts, badges, hats, even an exclusive video game. For the Spectrum, of course. That's a whole other video though, and I recommend this one because it's where I got the footage. And in the middle of it all, there was that damn 3-wheeled scooter thing. One of the worst designs for a vehicle in history. Tiny, roofless, made out of moulded plastic, level with a lorry's rear bumper, it provided its driver with the combination of looking like an absolute tit and genuine fear for their life. It was a dubious enough proposition just looking at it, but of course the journos at the launch event were invited to get in and take it for a spin, at which point the whole thing collapsed. Half the tricycles didn't work at all. Many others suffered flat batteries after just a few minutes. Someone tried to drive up a minor incline and needed to resort to pedal power, only to have the engine overheat with the strain. It's hard to imagine any product having a worse launch. If Clive Sinclair had shut himself right there in the middle of Alexandra Palace, it would only have made the day complete. And yet the C5 might still have recovered from such a disastrous start if it hadn't actually been, as the launch demonstrated, fundamentally crap. The thing had a top speed of 15 miles per hour, which was just as well as it limited the chances of getting your head sheared off by a passing lorry. The electric motor was actually quite good in theory, but it was nowhere near ready for prime time. Apart from being barely able to power a tricycle up a small hill, it ate batteries alive. An appalled report from the British Safety Council piled bad publicity on bad publicity. Ultimately, they sold barely 5,000 of the things, many of which were sent back. Sinclair was almost ruined and his reputation tanked, although in both cases they did eventually recover to an extent. The end. Hang on though, isn't this show supposed to be about adverts, not failures? Well, I told you that story, so etc, etc. Back at that launch event, amidst the press packs being given away by ladies in C5 t-shirts, was a special souvenir edition of a magazine called C5 Driver, the official magazine of the vehicle. The one and only edition that was ever printed, for obvious reasons. It's quite possible they intended it to become an ongoing proposition one day, but that obviously... I don't need to finish that sentence. So this became the one and only issue, a glorified leaflet, full of excited copy about a doomed scooter. Surprisingly, it does include adverts, which is why it's on this programme. Yes, finally we're going to get on with what the show's supposed to be about. These adverts are obviously all for the various companies and investors that Sinclair convinced to be a part of the C5 in some way or another. Except for the first, which is obviously for the damn tricycle itself. I'm going to skip it though, because it's just 2 pages of wide-eyed copy about how great it is and how it's the future of transport, and I've already explained how it wasn't and isn't. So we'll turn the page to be greeted by Oldham Batteries, manufacturers of guess which piece of the C5's anatomy. And there it is, the little square box that the copy claims powers the C5 vehicle. Which it did, for about 20 minutes ago as it turned out. More if you lived in Norfolk, about 30 seconds if you lived in Shaftesbury or Merthyr Tydfil. Know the approximation of a set of C5 tracks to support the pun in the title. Nice attention to detail. Next, probably the classiest of Sinclair's collaborators, Lotus Cars, Britain's very own luxury auto manufacturer, and there are still people who talk in hushed tones about the esprit. They were the ones who designed the C5's chassis, perhaps surprisingly considering how badly they did it. I was once under the impression that the C5 failed, at least partly because Clive Sinclair designed circuits, not cars. Lotus don't have that excuse. Anyway, they don't actually mention that at all in their advert here, surprisingly enough. Instead, they boast that they're turning out a few more esprits than usual. You have to admire their balls in attempting to turn the fact that they don't have anything like the resources of Porsche or BMW or Mercedes into a positive. Hey, it just makes Lotus Cars more exclusive. Like Alfa Romeos. Only they turn out a fuck ton more as well. The picture is a reminder of the days when the fashion for luxury cars was as pointy as possible. You wouldn't want to sit on that accidentally, would you? Talk about injection. Next, did I mention that the benighted thing was made of moulded plastic? Like an office chair, although hopefully slightly more durable and less prone to cracking, although I wouldn't count on it. Well, this was courtesy of Britain's biggest plastics manufacturers, Linpack, which back then was both written as 2 words and not a subsidiary of a German multinational. Here's a blueprint, which could be of almost anything, apparently being drawn in the Take On Me dimension, in some kind of mind-bending Inception-style shenanigans. It's not all about the people involved in making the thing, though. There's the retail end to think about as well, and Comet seem to have that sewn up, judging by their presence here in the official magazine. They've made space in branches nationwide to host Sinclair Vehicles battery centres, where the few dozen poor bastards who actually bought a C5 can buy new batteries, spare battery packs and chargers, probably on a daily basis. Between this and their status as the main supplier of square reels, Comet knew how to back a winner, didn't they? No wonder they went bust. Next up, a stuff advert of all things. The C5's main central attribute, apart from making you look like a dingus, was that it was electric. That was Sir Clive's main concern. The electric car, which he was smart enough to know was perfectly feasible even then, was taking too long to actually emerge, thanks to the stone cutters. And so he stepped in to kickstart the industry, no pun intended, if that even counts as a pun. Anyway, he failed miserably, but it was a noble intention, and obviously the Electricity Council had to get behind it with this game attempt at listing the pros of the C5, which amounts to 3 different ways to say it's electric and not petrol. Plus a vague nod to the fact that it was extremely lightweight, which it was. So much so it could be nicked as easily as by picking it up and carrying it away, if anyone had been dumb enough to actually want to nick one. At least they praised Sir Clive for trying. Another unique selling point to the C5 related to that lightweight body was the fact that unlike any other road vehicle, it came in a box. An engineered fireboard bow water box, to be very precise, according to this next advert for those very packaging manufacturers. They claim in the copy to be from Newport, but the address given is in Hertfordshire, which doesn't fill me with confidence. Not Hertfordshire itself, we've got nothing against Hertfordshire, it's just a mismatch. Lovely Rita meter made there for scale, presumably. I don't know what other purpose they could be for her presence. Next up in our advertising journey through the C5 is the motor, which was outsourced to Italy and Polimotor Italiana of Genoa. Their advert is a slightly uncomprehending list of other stuff they've been hired to do, clearly compiled by someone whose first language isn't English. Barely an advert at all, really, more a sort of illustrated CV of an entire company. Next is the company hired to actually manufacture the damn things. No, not a car company. Why would a car company do it? Apart from the fact that it's an ideological rival, ultimately intended to replace cars altogether, laughable as that turned out to be, the only thing it actually has in common with cars, technically speaking, is a motor and some wheels. And the motor's not much like a car's either. Ain't no internal combustion going on there. No, Sinclair got themselves a nice new production line at the Hoover factory in Merthyr Tydfil. The ideal choice, according to the advert, but then of course it says that. Just don't expect to drive them straight out of the factory. Merthyr Tydfil is notoriously hilly. As part of the same deal, Hoover also gets to be the official subcontractor for servicing and spares, to be very exhausting very quickly. And then there's 2 pages in the back cover left, so Sinclair take the opportunity to plug one of their other products in the industry their founder actually knows anything about. The Sinclair QL, the company's forgotten 3rd generation home computer. That's home computer, not a console. This one's aimed at serious business persons, spreadsheets and word processing and all that good stuff. The QL stands for Quantum Leap. Here's an obligatory picture of Scott Bakula. Let's consider that reference done. And the company is at pains to underline how powerful and futuristic it is. A massive 128K of memory. A 32-bit architecture that may sound daunting. Still got that unsettling keyboard texture though. And more importantly, the non-standard disk drive. The QL had actually been out a year by this point and was already floundering, largely because it was released before it was finished. They didn't even have a working prototype before the thing was in the stores, which meant that 8 times out of 10 the customer took it home to find that the damn thing didn't work. That's the kind of bad publicity that rival companies would pay a premium to inflict if they could. Once the C5 and its not dissimilar issues detonated Sinclair's reputation altogether, well, all bets were off. Finally, on the back page, Barclaycard. They don't actually have anything to do with the C5. Maybe Barclays invested in it, I don't know. But they've been persuaded to host a competition to win one. All you have to do is A. have a Barclaycard, B. show up at the Capital Cruiser, Capital FM's equivalent to the Radio 1 Roadshow, and C. have a benevolent attitude towards potentially possessing a C5. Even Barclaycard seemed kind of dubious about the whole thing though. I mean, look at the heading. Get 15 miles per hour out of a Barclaycard. They could have made that seem more impressive. Get a set of wheels out of a Barclaycard. Get motoring, something like that. I mean, it still would have been lame, but it would have played up the C5, instead of what being painfully honest about its abilities does. As it is, it kind of feels more like a warning. They also seem to be harping on the word tricycle rather a lot. It's not an insult to call the C5 a tricycle, of course, that's what it is. But Sinclair and his company seem to want to play that particular word down. The word shows up twice in this advert, and not at all in the magazine devoted to the vehicle itself, bar a tiny piece of small print in the facts and figures section where it's used as a strictly technical term, almost a dictionary definition. This advert's use of the word tricycle, complete with capital T, and this could be mere projection on my part, and probably is, but I can't get away from the suspicion they've typed it with the corners of their lips twitching a bit. Tricycle. Accurate though it is, unavoidably makes the C5 seem like a ridiculous toy, which unfortunately is what it is. And so the C5 continued on the pattern set by its catastrophic launch. It was almost immediately a laughingstock, didn't sell for crap, and was an anvil around Sir Clive Sinclair's neck for the rest of his life. Sinclair vehicles collapsed altogether, and the vast majority of Sinclair Research's assets were ultimately sold to Alan Sugar and Amstrad. One of the first things they did, incidentally, was cancel the QL. The company itself continued, but by 1990 it was down to 3 employees, including Sir Clive. Still, he never stopped trying to solve the electric vehicle problem, despite his setbacks and, frankly, despite common sense. Later attempts included the Zyke, the fold-em-up A-bike, and the Sinclair X1, which is almost like a finished version of the C5. It had walls and a roof at least. Well, some walls. The problem with all of these is that Sir Clive never did seem to understand that people won't buy a vehicle if the act of driving it makes you look like a pillock. Sir Clive died in 2021, remembered as a great pioneer of electronics and computing and one of Britain's most important inventors of the latter half of the 20th century. And unfortunately also as the silly sod who tried to sell a trike that could barely move as the future of transportation. But mostly it was the former, and quite right too.
Imagine a vehicle that can drive you 5 miles for a penny. A vehicle that needs no petrol, just a battery. And that takes the press of a button to start, the squeeze of a lever to stop. That needs no license, no road tax, and you can drive whether you're 14 or 40. A vehicle that costs just £399. The Sinclair C5. It's a new power in personal transport. The Sinclair C5, £399. Want to buy one? Want to see one? Or simply want to read all about it? Just dial 100 and ask for free phone C5 now.
You just sat through a Bob the Fish production. Nice! If you haven't already, you absolutely must check out bobthefish.org.uk. Literally hundreds more videos not unlike that one, adding up to days worth of entertainment and all absolutely free. But if you're not a cold-hearted skinflint, you can always support us on Patreon. For as little as anything at all, you can make programs like the one you just watched possible in the first place, and become eligible for bonus material such as glimpses of the book I'm writing about the BBC, monthly riffings on random commercial breaks, the complete archives of the angry political satire magazine Two Sons, and even the odd very occasional bonus video essay unavailable anywhere else. If nothing else, you should prevent me from starving and or freezing to death in the foreseeable future, so that'll be nice. No pressure or anything. bobthefish.org.uk. You make it what it is.